Okay, and we're recording. So, welcome back, Woody. Hope you had a great trip. And we've got a couple of people scheduled to join us today. And so far, one has arrived, and and we've got lots of questions. So I'm going to first introduce Olga Stambler, who's one of my own locals here. She's recently trained. Olga, can you just say hello and welcome to this? Okay.
Hello, I'm very glad to be here and glad to be part of the group. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. So what I've done, Woody, I just want to recap this for our viewers. We've gotten a good number of questions this week, and there were a couple of themes that overlapped them, and the questions came, one directly from Olga, another from Kevin Scudder, who's been with us before, and one from Ann Cerny, who's a mental health professional here in the Chicago area as well. And rather than read each of the questions specifically, they seem to present a common theme. And that's, I'm trained and I'm being the best I can be collaborative. What do I do when the other person either isn't trained or is not being collaborative? I thought it was a great set of questions.
Yeah, I did as well, and it takes a lot of insight and courage to ask those kinds of questions, Olga. But before I answer, I'd like to hear more about you and indicate a little of your training and what happened, or what are some of the factors that occurred that prompted this question, some of the experiences that you had.
Okay, well, a brief recap of my background. I trained as a transactional attorney, a corporate attorney, for over a decade before I transitioned to family law. So the mindset of a transactional attorney versus a litigator is certainly very different, and so I'm seeing both sides of that, but I think my inclination is my mindset works more like a transactional attorney, so I was very driven towards collaborative practice because that's my comfort zone in any case. With that specific question, I actually had that situation before I was collaboratively trained. A client came to me and his spouse had hired one of the leading collaborative attorneys in Chicago to represent her. So I was the untrained attorney in that scenario, working with, on the opposite side, a collaboratively trained attorney without really knowing anything much about collaborative practice. And so it was certainly a different experience working with her. And so it led me to think, well, how would I handle it if I was on the other side of this transaction? And if my next client who wants to engage me as a collaborative attorney then has a spouse who's represented by somebody who's not trained and possibly not even collaborative?
Well, the interesting thing is you were approaching it because you have 10 years as a transactional lawyer, and I would probably, I'm going to be presumptuous, but please allow me, that you also have a peacemaker heart, that you wanted to help your clients as far as a new paradigm way. And I hope I'm not too far off.
No, that's accurate. I was a little challenged because I was working in a firm where the predominant focus was litigation and not peacemaking or settlement. So the lead, it was my case, but sort of the owner of the firm still had his pulse on everything and thoughts on how things needed to be handled. So I had to balance the way I wanted to run it and handle it and still address, his strategic input. So it was a little bit of a balancing act, but my inclination is always to try to follow the amicable route.
So let me play with you a little ask you some questions and then I will answer. When you approached it, so you're the untrained attorney. You're the untrained You're the untrained person here. Were you willing to sign a participation agreement with a disqualification clause?
It was never presented to me. I never knew that such a thing existed when I was on this case. So I don't know how the other attorney approached it in terms of whether she had a participation agreement with her client or not, but she never presented any such thing to me. So,
but you know now what that's all about. Yes. So I noticed that Carl, Michael, and I were both smiling.
Yeah.
Because you've started to make one of the points I was going to make myself. You were a peacemaker without training. The person you were working with had training, and I'm putting quotation marks around training. And in this situation, the trained person didn't mention or present the opportunity for you to engage in a participation agreement. This is not a criticism of her, but it is not, unfortunately, not uncommon for two things. One, for there to be wonderful peacemakers who have not yet had the training, who are willing to work in a new paradigm, and who are willing to use the wonderful principles and guidelines of our collaborative profession. And there are people who have been trained and are beginning training to qualify many people is only 16 hours. Question is whether that is sufficient to even be called a collaborative practitioner, but let's assume it is. So what we have is a challenge for you and for many people out there in video land who love this work but are challenged with when is it okay to work in a collaborative setting? When is it okay for yourself? And when is it okay to trust and work with, in a very open and transparent way, someone who may not be trained? And before we even go to the answers, I'd like to go to Carl Michael and ask, is this one acceptable way to frame the question?
I think it's a good way to frame the question. It's because it does come up sometimes, and yes, one person is trained, the other isn't. I always point out to people, Stu Webb never took a training before he started doing this. So would you hesitate to do a collaborative case with Stu Webb? I probably wouldn't. So it highlights that circumstance, highlights what I think you're framing it for, which is what is the mindset of each professional going in.
And are we to be controlled and dictated by protocol and standards which are coming from the very best of intention when we represent our clients and we see an opportunity to have them benefit from a new paradigm approach to their content?
Woody, we've got Carol calling in, so I'm going to add her. Hold that thought. Can you hear me, Carol? Carol?
Yes.
Please put your microphone on
Hello?
mute. Please put your microphone on mute. We'll get back to you. We're right in the middle of things. Okay, thanks for joining us. Woody, you were saying?
Yes, so let me relate this to a training that I just did last week in Cleveland. There were 80 people there from 4 different organizations, many collaboratively trained, many mediation trained, many trained in both, and some trained in neither. And I think I would love it if some of my Cleveland colleagues were on here, but maybe they can join us through your magazine in between sessions.
Mm-hmm. Add comments. I hope they will. Yeah.
Yes, the sense I received was that they were very pleased to know, at least from me, because I don't speak for the field, I just speak for me, that I believe that, number one, we have to be flexible with our approach and accepting of others, and that quite often it is important, and it may be the most important input we could ever give our clients, is to take a risk with another professional, lawyer, who says that she or he wants to be new paradigm and collaborative, but may not be officially trained yet, for 2 reasons. One, it's because that is the lawyer the other side has chosen, and we sometimes have to play the cards we're dealt. And even though my client has selected a trained collaborative professional who always signs a participation agreement with a disqualification clause, because I never go to court, the other side made a different choice. And to get into a turf war of trying to get them to the other side to change lawyers, I don't think is appropriate, and it's often going to lead to more conflict. So that's one reason. The second is that many people I have found who are willing to sit down and talk collaboratively without training are one step away from fully joining our community, because all they have to do is take the training. And if they have a good experience and their clients are treated well, they may very well be a trained colleague like that, in the next available training. So that to me, the safe container of the disqualification clause is an elixir that heals many. And that is, if she had been willing, or you, the untrained person, Olga, had been willing to sign a participation clause, like the lawyer who represented the other party in the Disney matter that I represented, Roy Disney, the other lawyer was not trained at all, but he signed the participation agreement with the disqualification clause. It gets us most of the way there. So, to sum up, I believe we have challenges. We have challenges with trained people. We have challenges with untrained people. And that I believe that we really should be open and tolerant of differences in favor of our client. I can be more specific as we go along with more examples. But Olga, how does that sound for you?
Can I need to? Okay, I need to interject first.
Your mute button is still
Olga,
on.
your mute button is off. We need to unmute your mic. Carol, is your microphone muted? Look on the lower left-hand corner of the screen. Do you see a picture of a microphone, Carol? Lower left-hand corner of the...
I don't see anything. Oh, okay, yeah.
In the browser window, do you see a little microphone? Okay. Looks like you clicked on it. When you click on it, you're muted. We need you to mute until you're talking. Okay, thanks. And Olga, unmute.
Okay, sorry. What I was saying is, what you said makes perfect sense, but that wasn't exactly my situation. In my situation, I was never asked whether I was interested in having any sort of collaborative approach. It was never explained. The other attorney had no idea if I was a staunch litigator or not. I had met her before, so she knew me personally, so she probably knew my personality. But there was no discussion in terms of our situation that we would refrain from litigation. And as a matter of fact, there was a lot of animosity between the parties, and it took a lot of work with myself and my opposing counsel to keep them under control. But there were certainly threats of protective orders and other litigation that might have been necessary just to keep things a little bit under control. So I think she did mention to me at some point that she would have to withdraw if the case went to litigation. So I assume her approach was she was just going to wing it, see what happened. If it went to litigation, she'd have to withdraw. But if she could get the case settled one way or the other without litigation, even though it wasn't a collaboratively done case, we didn't follow any of the collaborative models. There were no four-ways. There weren't any other professionals involved. There was no aspect of the capital C collaborative in it other than we didn't go to court and we both worked together to get the case settled. So I guess in the real world, you just roll the dice and try your best.
Well, actually, I agree with much of that, but our profession and our training helps us do our best more often, I think, to help the parties, and by not mentioning the collaborative agreement, the participation agreement, I don't think we should take her collaborative card away. On the other hand, I also would like to think that people who are trained would make that one of our first things that we talked about. Yeah. Actually, it's in a broader sense. So, Olga, what process are we going to use to best help our clients? To actually have a process discussion before we try and get mired into the issues at hand. By her statement she would have to withdraw, she was giving you some very good information that she was not going to take this to court. So actually I'd be interested, what signal did that tell you?
Well, I knew her from a previous life. I knew her, although I didn't know a whole lot about her practice. So I had enough familiarity with collaborative that litigation wasn't an option. If you're a collaborative practitioner, you can't litigate the case. So I wasn't surprised to hear that from her. And she told me that her client wanted to handle the case collaboratively, which in my untrained mind was try to cooperate, find some middle ground, and get the case settled as quickly as possible. So sounded fine to me. I just didn't understand really what it meant or what the process was. So I was on board in spirit.
It brings up. I'm sorry. It brings up as I hear you're saying too, Woody. The larger embrace is supporting the clients toward a decision that works for the two of them. What we call it is of less importance. How we structure it, so long as it is of less importance, so long as it provides what Woody described, a safe container for them, so that among other things, they know what's going to happen. Certainly, it sounds like one of the challenges you had as the untrained person may have been a not bad, but still confusing set of messages. Is it simple pretrial negotiations? Does the fact that the other attorney has told you that she's not taking the case to trial, does that have any impact on you whatsoever? She's shared with you what her relationship with her client is. Does that have any impact on your relationship with your client? Does it necessitate in any way that you change your retainer agreement with your client? Because it sounded to me from what you described, and remember, we're 3 ways removed here. We're not listening even to that attorney's conversation with her client, much less your conversation with her. But from the way you described it, it sounded to me like the attorney had entered into a limited representation retainer with the client. Would you agree with that, Woody?
I don't know, but could have. And the interesting thing, though, Olga, is that if you were to do a survey, as I have informally, of the people who have been trained, most of them earn their living 90% or more through litigation and 10% or less through mediation and or collaborative training. So the fact that you actually got lucky. The lawyer that called that you were in dialogue with, who doesn't go to court, is a very small percentage of all of the collaborative lawyers that are in our community. So for those out there, I'd be very interested if, and by the way, I assume you still go to court? Or do you go to court?
Yeah, I have to. Well, if I were to take a collaborative case, then I would have a participation agreement and I would not. But I think for most of us out there, we couldn't make a living if we limited our practice to collaborative only. So for those clients that aren't willing to, approach it collaboratively and just want the more traditional representation, of course we have to, I certainly have to include that in my practice, because there just isn't enough. I think, as a totally different topic of conversation, I think the PR machine behind the collaborative world is really kind of behind. And I think most people that I talk to aren't familiar with it, have never heard of it. Many attorneys haven't heard of it, and certainly non-attorneys. It's just not very well known out there that this is an option, and that's another side project that I'm working on, is actually kind of promoting the practice. But I think there are just not enough clients to sustain a practice for most of us.
Go ahead. I have some thoughts on that.
Michael knows what I'm about to say.
What?
Is that in my trainings, I actually spend a good deal of time training people to see that they can make more money if they gave up litigation, if they became fully committed peacemakers with both feet in. And that's a subject that we've discussed before, and so I won't go into it in great detail today, but it has worked for me in my office building. We have several lawyers who have done that, both feet in, and Carl Michael has both feet in. And as I go around the world, it isn't just this country. When I was in Dublin just 3 weeks ago, there were lawyers in the practice group who only did non-litigation work, and they were the busiest with collaborative, with mediation, with limited scope work, for all kinds of reasons, not the least of which is that their work and their referral sources and their skill set followed that commitment. So I just would like to offer a different view than you indicated, Olga.
Yeah.
Because I do know that it often appears that one has to keep with the old paradigm in order to pay the rent, and that I actually have a different approach.
Yeah.
Carl Michael?
That's encouraging to the new ones. So that's we're the new ones on the block. It's very encouraging.
I agree, and the one, as I'm sure you know, Woody, I could riff on that topic for about a half an hour. So I'm holding myself back. What I will say is, one of the things that I have heard for years is what you echoed, Olga, the basic premise that there aren't enough clients who want to do this. I don't see, you can wait till they come knocking on your door, but the same number of clients are going to be knocking on your door regardless. If you get, let's say you get 20 intakes in a week. If you're going to wait for all 20 of your intakes to come in demanding that you do collaborative practice, it'll never happen for you. Part of your task, part of your ethical obligation is to explain collaborative practice and litigation and mediation as their options in going through the divorce process. If you do that effectively and with conviction, my conviction is easy. Because like Woody, I tell them, I'll mediate with you. I'll work with you in mediation. I'll work with you in collaborative practice. I will not go to court with you. I will not litigate. So my conviction is pretty easy to communicate. But if you're going to stay open to doing litigation, but you want to do collaborative practice, then you have to look deep inside as to about what am I saying and not saying to the client who's sitting in front of me, wanting desperately for me to tell them, what should I do here? What am I telling them that they consistently choose litigation? So I wanted also to kind of move, I'm mindful of your time limits, Woody. I wanted to kind of segue us into a couple of other questions, if I may. Was that helpful?
Yes, may I just...
Yeah. Was that helpful, Olga?
Yeah, no, it was very helpful. And I think one day when I have my own practice, that's exactly what I would do. But while I'm still an employee at a firm that's a litigation-driven firm, although they've given me the flexibility to say, okay, you'll be the solo collaborative practitioner, go get trained, go out and see if you can find clients. But while I'm still handed their clients to service, I have to service them the way they want to be serviced. So,
well, if the decision has already been made by the partner in your firm, yes, that's a different, if they're telling you this is a litigation case, then unless you talk to the partner about this might be appropriate for collaborative, yes, you have an obligation to your firm too. But if you're the one doing the intake, so.
By the way, before we go to the new question, Carl Michael,
yes.
I want to just report that all of us have new tools to work with as of the last week and a half. Linda Ray and Gay Cox have put together some of the best articles for our work. It's in the collaborative review that is on your desk if you're a member of IACP. And on page 10 of Gay Cox's article are factors that cause challenges and difficulty in collaborative cases. I'm just going to point these. I just show you a picture, and I will send you. I have permission to share this for educational purposes from IACP.
Okay.
Which is just a beautiful thing. Now, let me just review these. This is maybe a subject for a different call, of some of the things of whether there is a participation agreement that's going to be signed, or that we, as we're putting together the case with, by the way, Olga, I always call the other lawyer my collaborative partner, not opposing counsel, only because I don't consider them opposing. They're going to work with me. I'm going to work with them. So let me just give you some of the things that Gay Cox lists, which is just wonderful information for us all. 1, did either of the parties invade the privacy of the other? Number 2, was there verbal abuse? 3, are they having trouble cooperating? 4, will one or both fail to disclose? Next, do they work unilaterally? Next, are there unrealistic expectations either of each other or the process? I put in each other. The list says process. And by the way, I think this kind of a discussion, this process discussion between we and our collaborative partners, both helps us assess which process to use, and also gains a synergy and collaboration between us, because we're looking not just at our own client, but we're looking at the other party as well. So I'm sorry that I diverted us a little bit, Carl Michael, and I didn't finish the list, but I just wanted to point out that this is a rich area that I'm teaching on, and I know other colleagues are training as well.
Yeah. What I will be doing is adding a link to that article when this goes in the magazine. Of course, the link won't be effective except if you're logged in as a member of IACP, unless we get permission from them to actually reprint it. But I will start at least with that to make sure that our IACP people have access to it. So what I'm thinking now is a segue. We've moved from what do I do when one is collaboratively trained and the other isn't in terms of just starting the case. A kind of a broader question, and it went through several questions, was what happens when it feels to me like I'm behaving collaboratively, but someone else in the process isn't. And I'm going to use that to segue through one of Kevin Scudder's submitted questions to your question, Carol. Because one of the questions that Kevin Scudder asked us about was the use of practice groups as study groups. How do we choose, what kind of books would we study, what kind of thing? And I'd like to, as I mentioned to you before, Woody, I'd like to suggest that maybe a study group doesn't have to be limited to studying groups. You can pick, there's a lot of good books, several of yours, and several that you've referred to. But maybe you could look at the study group as studying the paradigm shift, and that's what and how we work well together. And that's the segue to your question, Carol, which was around, do you want to say hello? Just put your mic back on, and I'm hoping that we don't have a whole lot of feedback. Are you on?
Yeah, I'm now. I apologize. I had some kind of strange technical thing I had to add on before I could tune in. So
it's no big deal. I'm going to ask you to do one tech thing. Hover over that microphone, the one that you clicked on.
What?
Put your pointer, your mouse cursor on that microphone.
Right. And
see there's a little bar that pops up? Oops. We lost her. I was going to ask her to, I hope she will join us again. She must have clicked the wrong button. I'm going to read the question that she sent in, and while we're waiting for her to get back. So she posed to us, in making the paradigm shift to the collaborative model, what would you say are the specific challenges for each of the disciplines represented on the collaborative team? And, that's a topic that comes up a lot, isn't it, Woody? What are the...
It certainly is in all the interdisciplinary training and in the trainings that we do, and in the work that we do. And are we going to stay on that as opposed to what happens when someone is working is not collaborative? Which one would you like to focus on?
I think they interlace pretty nicely. And the point of interlacing is around the practice groups. When there is the piece that I'm seeing is around how can we use the practice group itself as a resource for addressing that question of what do we do when one of us isn't holding on to the shift, or is as something I posted recently suggested, sliding out of the shift, and how do we help each other across disciplines? I'm sorry we lost you, Carol. I read your question, and we've just begun working on it. So does that make sense as an interlacing point, Woody?
I think it does, although it kind of has us working in our own sandbox as opposed to outside, because if we've self-selected our practice group, I'd like to think that the people in our group, at least at the very first, are committing to a new paradigm and committing to practicing it and committing to having discussions when one feels that it's a little out of sort, and working those things out. So in a way, that's different than the situation when you're having a case and you're working with someone outside your practice group that you may not have had the time to get to know them, to talk about these issues, to play them through in both study and also preparation for cases. That doesn't mean that it can't be done, but I do think they're separate questions.
Okay.
I'd be interested in your thoughts, all of you, on that.
Well, the reason. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Carol?
Go ahead, Carol.
Carol. The reason for my question was because it seems if I had a better understanding of where other members of the team were come in terms of the shift that they're having to make, it might help me to better relate to, where they're coming from and how to deal with it if it seems like it doesn't fit the collaborative model. So
are
better.
You talking?
I don't stand in the shoes of these other people necessarily, and would like to have some appreciation for where their shift is coming from and how to support them in that what is assumed to be the upfront collaborative agreement.
So are you talking, Carol, about a member of your practice group with whom you're doing a case, or are you talking about in a more simulated study or group meeting, not directly case related?
Well, ideally you deal with some of these things in the assimilated situation first. But in any case, trying to figure out how you, when you see that slide, as Michael described it, how you approach getting that observation identified and acknowledged so that you can collaboratively deal with it.
Okay, well, I'm just going to give you my experience, and it very well may be different than Carl Michael's. First of all, I find that there is sometimes a disconnect and a difference the way collaborative colleagues talk among collaborative colleagues when there's no case, and the way they act when there is a case. In that some collaborative colleagues are extremely effective and transparent and delightful when we're talking abstractly about or telling stories of other cases. But when they're getting the pressures of a client or the challenges that we sometimes face at the table, there is a different approach. And to me, that's where I'd like to focus my discussion. But I'd like to hear from Olga and Carl Michael first before I do that.
Well, my view is that I think the training that we received in collaborative, and also for those of us who are trained in mediation, I think Carl Michael and I discussed this in an earlier meeting. Why is mediation required as a prerequisite for fellowship for some collaborative organizations? And now that I've had the mediation training, I understand why. I think it's enormously useful. And I think drawing on those resources, one needs to draw on them not just to handle clients, but to handle your collaborative partners. I mean, they're kind of the skill set for life, if you will. And I think that's what we have to draw on. And that's the approach. Try to understand the needs and interests of the collaborative partners and where their concerns are and where they're getting pressured from their clients, and try to just bring it all out on the table and deal with it that way.
I guess that's the very point of my question.
My thoughts flow along the lines of, in terms of your question, Carol, it's very helpful, and I'm sure in your initial training and if you've had any others, there's talk about what is, how is it that an attorney is confronted with thinking differently in wanting to do a collaborative case from the way he or she has to think about a litigated case. And there's talk about how a therapist has to think differently in dealing with a client than in the collaborative process than when they're doing therapy. And there's talk about the financial specialist, no longer doing sales or individual optimization, maximization therapy. Understanding that in principle is a good grounding. It's very helpful. And some of what I think I heard Woody saying is even more important. It so much revolves around the connection with the individual practitioner. You can pretty easily recognize when another professional is like leaving you with a huh. That's always your cue. It's not what they did or how that compares to what you think they're supposed to be doing. It's you sitting there going, huh? And that the first level of question has to be to yourself, what happened in me? What's my puzzlement? And then you have to ask genuinely inquiring questions of the other professional. I heard you say this. What was going on? So it's not, in practice, in my view, it's not so much about lining up, did you do this, did you do that? It's about the dynamics of small group relationships, because that's what it is. It's, in the smallest group, it's two clients, two attorneys, or two mental health professionals, or whatever, or two clients. You've probably seen this is in all your years of mediation too. You've had, I would assume, when it's just you and the two clients, and one client says or does something that leaves you going, and the first response for us has to be always pause, so that you can respond rather than react. And then when you respond...
Let me give you an example.
Okay, great.
Let me give you a practice example of something that just came up yesterday. I'm working with a very, very treasured and important colleague of mine here on a case. And the issue was, how much insurance should the earning spouse, in this case the husband, carry to secure both the child and spousal support, but also a buyout of the marital share of the business. So there's a lot of money that's being deferred out, and everyone is concerned about what would happen to the husband, to the wife, should there be a premature death. So my colleague and I said, let's consult a neutral insurance broker and get a range of monies that are needed to secure this, and what the cost will be, and what kind of instruments. And the insurance broker sent back his report. I then get a call from my colleague and said, Woody, this is very delicate because my client is getting pressure from his partners to wrap this thing up quickly. He wants not to have to spend a lot of time talking about the security issue, wants to work on it down the road. Maybe it can be approached better by your client, the wife, than by me in talking about this security, because they were getting along. And could we have a discussion about that before we contact our clients and present this issue? That is the height of acting out in a new paradigm way, I felt. She was open. She was transparent. She asked for my help. She hoped that I would give it, and that hope, I think, will be realized. And we've scheduled a conversation for Monday to be able to do it. So the proof is in the pudding often, and I think that's what you were saying, Carl Michael. But I also agree with Olga and behind Carol's question that we, as in practice groups, the way we react toward each other, that push the buttons in us, all of us, and how we handle interdisciplinary respect and parity, how we're able to discuss favorite and unfavorite models, like will you negotiate the participation agreement, or do you just have to use the one from the practice group? As we deal with those issues, that is where the discussion should go. I think it's often in the abstract not as helpful. but we have to be ready for those discussions by speaking about it abstractly and sharing where we've come from. And to know, for example, in Carol's question, from a therapist's point of view, how you, Carol, would deal with if there is a crisis, how do you, and that it might affect the children, how will you weight your interventions as to whether they'll be child-oriented or adult-oriented, and how much time for growth and for evolved reflection do we have, or how directive do we have to be to quell a possibly harmful set of interactions? And knowing how Carol was trained, how you view your therapy clients, and how you might differ with that in the collaborative setting will really help me in being able to advise my clients when I work with you, Carol.
Right. And vice versa.
And that's an ongoing learning situation.
So it's
Carmichael, your phone. I can't hear you, Carmichael.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was on mute. I'm mindful of the time. It's just about 3 for you. You needed to leave. Is that still true?
It is. Let me just tell you, I have parties and professionals, including financial and therapy. So, in fact, they're out in the waiting room, so I've got to run.
Okay.
But this is can we ask Carol and Olga to come back for our next one? Because I don't think we've covered this field yet, and I'm going to have to say goodbye.
It's fine by me if they're willing to. We'll let you say goodbye.
Looking forward to it.
Meeting you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. We'll let you say goodbye, Woody, and then I'll end the call. I'll end the recording, not the call. And Olga and I can continue to talk. Okay?
Bye-bye.
Woody, we'll talk to you soon. Bye now. And I'm going to end the recording now. I want to thank you both.
Okay.
I also want to thank
Thank you very much.
And I want to thank Ann Cerny and Kevin Scudder for their contributed questions. I hope we shed a little light on what all of you were asking about. And, these are long discussions, and it's a journey. So thanks for being part of the journey with all of us. And so
Thank you
so
for
much.
organizing it.
Okay, I'm going to end the recording now.